Hi. Good morning, everyone. There's a few people in the waiting room, but we will go ahead and get started and go over some of the logistics. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this very important and timely topic. We are going to be talking about crisis communication. And it's been a while since we've done one of these Zooms. So really quick logistics. If you have, everyone should be muted. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the chat feature at the bottom. If anyone forgets how to use Zoom or hasn't used it, if you hover your mouse towards the bottom, you'll see the chat box. If you have a question, put it in there and I will ask that for you. If it's something more in-depth, feel free to just flag me either through the chat box or do the raise your hand feature and I can call on you if you need to ask a more in-depth question or if you need to interact a bit. So today we have Mike Hart, CEO and owner of Hart, and Jeff Lutz, Vice President of Corporate Communications and Content, joining us to talk about crisis communication. As you've seen in the news, we've had some local issues. There's certainly a lot of national examples to go by. This is a topic that we've been talking about quite a bit in our education committee, and we felt that it was something that we needed to tackle, that we needed to get some of this good information out to our members, because as we've learned recently, you never know when it can happen to you. And once something happens, it spirals so quickly, it would be good to have some information and to be as prepared as you can. So with that, I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Jeff and Mike to get started.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you? Jeffrey, go ahead. You're going to advance, aren't you? So we're already introduced, but my name is Mike Hart. I've been with a few of you before, but I'm CEO of the agency and a member of the organization for a long time and been with the board many years ago. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes. And hello, I'm Jeff Lutz. Been with the agency just over 2 years now. Traditional PR agency background. Been at a couple agencies up in the Detroit area, which is where I'm joining you all from today. Yes, in my role, it's a mix of what we would call traditional PR tactics, media relations, social media, content development, but also, especially over the last year and change, it's been a lot in terms of crisis communications, and we'll be discussing that further today.
So here's what we hope to accomplish in the time we're together. We're going to mention a couple of challenges that we saw locally. One specifically that Angie referenced that you're all going to recognize in a hurry, and I think probably both of you will. Jeff's going to touch on the myths and truths of crises today. I think through COVID over the last 16, 17 months, there probably wasn't a week that went by that he or I didn't get a call about a crisis, and one that we didn't have to help out a client or a prospect with. And he's going to take you through a few of those. We're not going to let any clients' names out, but I think we'll share with you some ideas as to how we handled them. Jeff made a speech recently. He's going to share with you some trends on PR in general in the last 12 months that are pretty fascinating. And we'll talk about the evolution of crisis. We do have a little bit of a slide at the end to get you guys involved, and hope you'll ask us some questions along the way, and we appreciate the time to be with you. So here's a couple of recent challenges, and I think one that probably inspired Angie and Kirsten to reach out to us, and I'm sure you're familiar with. So, and this, I think, is the tweet that set up the one at Inside the Five. And this is a candidate who's running for Senate. And the tweet was, Inside the Five is a cool brewery started by 2 NFL vets. In fact, the one gentleman played local high school football as well, and a real good guy. Great food and spirited waitresses. Even though Brianne was sick today, she came to work because she knew they were short servers. These are the type of American workers that make our country strong. Now, I'm not going to give you opinions on right, wrong, or indifferent. We'll get into that. But I mean, that started off quite a crisis, A, for that candidate, and unfortunately, B, for that Inside the Five brewery, who was almost and frankly, for the young lady as well, it was a little bit of, those two were a little bit of collateral damage in that tweet. And the second one was, has turned into quite an issue. And this is Maumee water rates going up after the city discovered decades of sewage dumping into the river. And there's been editorials, there's been tweets, there's been stories, and it's all about a challenge at the city of Maumee. And so we'll discuss both of those in a little bit more detail. I trust and hope you guys have seen a little bit on both those, because they have been crises. You know, the lingering effects of those crises and any others like them with the world of social media is it can get out of control pretty quickly with increased attention on social, with the use of these things that we all love, you know, especially with previous content. So, you know, we have a tendency to panic, and that's why we call it crisis. We get calls morning, noon, and night from clients. What do I do? Who do I turn to? And I think that's where an outside objective resource, whether it's a firm like us or an individual or somebody on your staff, that can just say, hey, slow down, let's review the situation, and think about a tweet like that first one, or a situation like the city of Maumee. And it really can turn into a situation that can get out of control in a hurry if you don't take the time to think through what these crises mean. So I think an interesting slide about some myths and some facts. You know, I don't know how many of your businesses that are on the call today are local. Our business is in Toledo and Columbus. We have clients that reach well beyond that, but even that inside the 5 tweet, and I think if I remember right, they have a couple locations, but to say that your business is only local with the world of social is so far from the truth, because it can really, really quickly blow up into a regional, a national or international story. And also that, and especially that was happened to be involved a potential US Senate candidate as well. So it got real big real fast. My business is too small for anyone to care. I don't care how big your business is. It can still be a really significant story when it comes to a crisis. So don't ever assume that somebody doesn't care. And Jeff's going to get into some stories that will really blow your mind, and they're not all big stories or big businesses. And the past is in the past, without betraying anyone's confidence. And Jeff was a part of this. I interviewed somebody recently and extended the offer, and then found some stuff on social media where I had to rescind the offer of something that occurred on this young person's Twitter feed 7 years before. And the past is never in the past when it comes to social media or when it comes to crisis. I told my kids when they were in college, I said, be careful with this darn thing, because you never know what it can do. And so the past is never in the past when it comes to PR and crisis. And the belief that it's a PR thing, in quotes, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get a call from a client that says they thought they had it covered, and it's so much more than a PR thing. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. I mean, life is polarizing. I could spend the next hour talking about that, but I'm going to let those results speak for themselves with some situations Jeff will explain. And especially through COVID and through cancel culture and through Black Lives Matter and others, and Jeff has some really interesting situations to share. It really has become a jump on the bus mentality. And I think we have to be very careful about what we post and what we say and how we say it, because it is a mob mentality when it comes to our culture today. and there's plenty of Mike posts something, and next thing you know, somebody wants to share and say, do you see what he said, or do you see what he said? So you got to be careful with those wannabe whistleblowers, because they exist in our culture and in our world today. I'll come back at the end, but I hope you'll find this as fascinating as I did, and please don't hesitate to ask us some questions. We appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, as noted on the slide, I mean, it has been a very busy year of both change, but as well heightened awareness to issues. And those issues have created basically offshoot trends, which have both impacted how we operate from a communications perspective, but also how each of us are looking at social media. Think alone at Twitter. Twitter was a third-ranked social media platform for the longest time. In the first few months of COVID, it became #1 in the world for where communications was happening, the amount of engagement, the amount of people on it. Since then, it's really tailed off. It had a moment in time, and every now and then, based on the issue, you'll see these massive spikes will bring it back up to #1. That's what's happening in the mix. Both social media platforms are really taking off. The extensive conversations on those platforms are obviously increasing depending on the moment, and it's also creating other changes across businesses. So we know the hot points. The hot points are those items where people already have baked in interests. When you go to that social media network and you're ready to respond on Facebook, you already have those baked in beliefs. And those beliefs are creating both echo chambers for individuals on their own social platforms. The belief, in other words, of you only follow people that have those same beliefs as you do. So when you step outside those echo chambers, it feels like another world. And that's what's taking place and why we see these crises really boiling up. It's people having conflict of realities. The #1 question that we ask prospective employees is, how do you communicate in a world where potentially two realities exist? And it's that mentality that individuals may look at something in a completely different light, and where we have to find that middle ground. Beyond those primary interests, secondary interests. Usually, I used to live in upstate New York. You knew the people that were Giants, Mets, Knicks fans compared to Jets and Yankees fans. There were those brands of people, and with those brands meant that they shopped at that mall over there, that they were on that social media platform, that there are beliefs associated with that. So again, it's creating those echo chambers of essentially profiling individuals based on certain categories. And misinformation and deep fakes. If you don't know what deep fakes are, get knowledgeable about this subject immediately. Deep fakes are videos that essentially perpetuate the image of somebody, but it may not be that individual. They're on YouTube right now, there are great examples of Queen Elizabeth and Tom Cruise and other celebrities who have had these deep fakes created. This is going to be an ever-present issue in a world of misinformation, and the added issue of fact-checking, which is not happening on an individual basis. It's a lot easier to hit like than fact-check a resource. And the lingering trends have happened over the past 12 months. Black Lives Matter and the movement around it taught us that releases, statements, messages were not enough. And businesses have to go to another level, a mission level, looking at the business and how they're operating in their community. Some stuff and AMC and others, where you get individuals using Reddit and the power of Reddit to come together and change an organization. Think how AMC alone as a business has evolved over the past few months because a number of individuals on Reddit decided to throw their money at it. And of course, misinformation. The big thing for misinformation moving forward, platforms like Twitter are actually allowing individuals to pay to either remove or edit previous tweets. That is a game changer when we look at the history of individuals and people looking to tell stories moving forward. We also see tremendous client needs, and they fall in these 4 categories every single time. Everything is a novel crisis. Like, we get the crises in the door, it's the belief that this has never happened before. Crises tend to have the same sort of flavors to them. There's a emotional level, an emotional attack associated with it. There's usually some third party involved, and there's a threat of either media relations or social media engagement. We also see social channel ownership, people saying, you know what, I've seen enough trouble on my Facebook page, you handle it. This is a huge trend right now. People essentially recognizing that the days of owning 4 or 5 social channels and hoping to put the same content across them all doesn't work. The idea that public officials are essentially afraid of their citizens right now. Mike and I have had tons of conversations around the fact that right now public officials are essentially deathly afraid of their own citizens. And when I tell that to people, the frequent response is good. That's a good thing. But is it? Is it really a good thing? Is it a good thing that there are officials out there who are willing to basically just be hands off and do nothing because that's in their better interests and that won't rile up individuals? Think of the world that we live in where that takes place. That's a whole different situation. And of course, everything at the end of the day needs ROI. Even if we're in the middle of a crisis, what is the benefit of managing that crisis? So crises have taken on a new chapter, and perhaps, Angie, I should reach out and say if there have been any questions.
Not to this point. Nope.
Right on. I will continue on. So crises have really taken a new step. And, when we used to look at crisis communications, the main rule we would always say is look for the bottom. In other words, understand where the bottom is of the crisis, so then you can start messaging your way out of it. Today, crises are what we say, we call them shallower. So they don't have that sharp bottom. In fact, they're flatter at the bottom. So in other words, they're always at a tipping point of, could they go even lower or could they spike higher? And that's what we're seeing. They're faster. So social commentary, any sort of software that we've looked at, social commentary for potential crises, they go in exponential stages essentially of engagement. So sure, it may be one tweet that happens and then they hit a level, and then a number of conversations happen, they hit another level. So we're seeing that exponential spike when a crisis takes place. As you know, they're also shallower. There's an actual advantage of being in a 24-hour news cycle that, it's a look over here. 1 second you're trending, 1 second you're not trending. But the question is, what's the collateral damage that happens even though you're left behind, because there's no ability to really jump back in and provide that positive commentary that takes out from that bottom. And then, of course, the attention window, as noted, is smaller but can have a long tail. One of the rules that we'll jump into about cancel culture is that cancellations don't happen on first offense. So if something bad were to happen to your business or something negative from a third party coming in, that's not a cancel. That's not the cancellation moment. The cancel
It's like we've lost Jeff.
That piece frozen for me too.
Yeah, I can.
Maybe he's been canceled.
I tell you what, when he starts speaking, unfortunately, he's driving the thing too. So let me text him real quick. I'd be happy to pick up, but he's driving the PowerPoint. I'll see if he can log in and log back. Yeah, he's gonna have to log in. Can I answer any questions for anybody while he's coming back in?
Yeah. But there he is.
All right, there he is. Sorry about that, guys. You're muted now, Jeff. I'm sure you've seen it all, Angie.
Hello again.
Got it. I think you got to reshare.
Yep. Sorry about that.
One, Mike Langendorfer said you were canceled and you disappeared.
How about that?
That's good.
Good, I've been uncanceled. So the idea of cancel culture, the quick summary here, it's an overused term. You probably hear it all over the map. We've actually spoken with people who have been canceled before. And what a cancellation means in the one of the individuals I'm thinking of, they put out a tweet, somebody had applied to their business. They looked at their personal Instagram profile, the person who applied, and they saw that they were in a very, they were in a bathing suit on the beach. And they thought that that was inappropriate for this group to hire somebody that would wear that sort of bathing suit on the beach. And this individual, this female entrepreneur, reached out to that individual and said, you know what, with posts like these, I can't hire you. Well, that individual who was, applying for that job posted that response on social media and got 57 likes. And you think, 57 likes, that's not a big deal. Well, one of those people that liked it had 80,000 followers. And they retweeted that to 80,000 followers. Of those 80,000 followers were two producers at one at Good Morning America, one at the Today Show. Let's just say it accelerated and it kept going. And even though this person issued an apology, it didn't matter. It's a life of its own. And that's what we see in these crises. The tactics in terms of social media commenting, that there's a background analysis that's happening. There's negative media press. There's something called doxing. And for those of you that may not be familiar with this term, it's the idea that there are people out there that are so interested in taking you down that they'll find your personal information and they'll share it online. In the case that I was mentioning, the individual gets about 100 death threats daily. Still to this day, the incident happened 3 years ago. How does this happen? The information is public and people get a sense of joy out of it. And that's what we've seen. In fact, there's a great TED Talk that we've shown here on the right side, which is a fantastic watch. It was done in 2015 by John Ronson. And John speaks of this individual, Justine Sacco. Justine Sacco is a PR pro who had very few followers on Twitter. And before she left for a trip to South Africa, she tweeted, going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white. Actually tweeted that out. She had maybe 100 followers. By the time she landed, she had 1 million followers, lost her job, and was trending on Twitter. That's how quick it happened in her world. And that's what we highlight. Cancellations is not something to be afraid of. A cancellation is a very extreme event that has an initial act, has these fuel injectors, somebody gets new information, there's a new post over here, and it just takes off from there. There's a bright side to all this. And let's look at that in terms of what's happening from a PR strategy and how we can use information to our benefit. So when we look at influencers, those individuals on social media which have big followings, those individuals Traditionally, you would find maybe a third-party service and you would say, find me some influencers and work with them directly. The other thing that we look at is when we're looking at influencers directly, we're always looking at influencers in a broader sense. Those people that influence the business, that influence the community. These aren't always people with YouTube, 10 million followers. These are individuals that may have 1,000 followers, but when they tweet, those 1,000 followers create a network of 1,000 responses. So that's what we're looking at here. When looking at influencers, always bringing in additional data resources, validating who they are. We're always doing these national campaigns. This is with a healthcare organization, and we're working with celebrities. And when we work with these celebrities, the thing we always emphasize with them is authenticity. The idea that they're not just going to look like an ad, that they're going to post something that's organic, that looks like themselves, and includes that information as well. When we look at sentiment, so the idea that a negative response may come into the business, sentiment is usually always one-sided. The idea that the community is negative, that a reporter had a negative post. So when looking at addressing that appropriately, we did this with a governmental organization. We were able to target those individuals of negative posts on Facebook, identify who they are, their tendencies, and then from there, and then of course, from a crisis standpoint, we always advise to have some level of understanding to the key points to the kingdom, essentially, during those moments of crises. In other words, for social media, who is managing those social media channels? What is the password? Who has access to those? For media relations, when the reporter comes talking, who is our lead individual to respond to the media accordingly? Making sure that we have all those different assets in place for when that crisis can potentially happen. In working with the CPG brand directly, they were operating in the beginning of COVID out of a pure place of fear. And how we changed that fear into actions and activities was basically looking at their past, what had worked for social media in the past when they had those dark moments, how they were able to get out of it, identify some of those avenues, but also what we're highlighting here is the secondary and tertiary circles. In other words, yes, they could post to their heart's content all the positive info, but who are those individuals who can add extra flavor to help push something toward the positive, or at least to a neutral point where those communications can land? So that's what we've seen from a data integration standpoint of when either identifying influencers, those third parties who can help in moments of crises, but also ensuring that everything is planned and prepared so that we're not panicking of the process or panicking around planning when we need to be taking actual action toward a crisis. So with that in mind, we've gone through a few different items. Before we summarize, Mike and I wanted to share a situation with you all that we faced, and we thought it might be interesting for some of you to take a look at this and tell us how you might respond to the situation. So this is the situation that took place. Put yourself in the shoes of this small business executive. So you're a small business executive, as noted. A colleague managing your web page brings an email to your attention. So that colleague could be an intern, a colleague could be anybody. But somebody says, hey, an email came in through our website. The email states an out-of-state individual is threatening to go to the press because they believe that a noose-like object was found in a window of one of your biggest customers. What do you do? What is the first action that you take to start to turn this positive or avoid a negative situation?
And I would say, Jeff, that this was in the height of the Black Lives Matter public times as well, to add to that statement. So anybody want to be PR man or woman and say what you would do? And then Jeff can tell you what we advise.
You mean like when you're saying one of your customers, you mean like we do countertops and we sell to kitchen and bath dealers? Is that what you're talking, that news would be at a kitchen and bath dealer
Yep.
or at ours? At
Nope.
ours?
It'd be at one of your dealers, Mike. But that dealer called you and she had said, hey, made you aware of it. And wanted to know what you're going to do about it.
Well, I'm not prone to overreact, I don't think, but I think I would just sit on it temporarily or discuss it with that dealer and just, not raise a big stink about it, not initially, and just see where it went. I think that would be my first response.
Okay. Anybody else?
I guess that's where my kind of gut goes to. The first thing is it's not directly my company, but I kind of feel that might be the wrong answer.
Okay.
I would want to respond that there's going to be some investigation being done into this because you don't know if it's actually true or not. And you would want to respond with, you're at least looking into it because that's not something you would be supportive of.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to be crisis extraordinaire? And these guys were really, this was one of their, Mike, in your world, probably one of their larger dealers. And so I think they were calm, but panicked. And there was a lot of stuff in social and the press about not great things at that time.
Well, you want to know what I was thinking I would do or what I would have actually done?
That's okay. You can, I mean, be honest.
My opinion, at my age and my background, I would have said, I don't really care what they say. It's not there, move on. And I personally think that this stuff goes away pretty quickly if it's not overdone. So, but sometimes people have a tendency just to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until they get a reaction. So.
What did we say?
Mike, to that point,
the older we get, the less of a filter we have.
Less of the filter and less I really don't care anymore, I guess. So it's out of control. Everybody knows that. So.
So to that end, I'm just going to play off of Mike's thoughts there. We've seen the hands-off approach, which I appreciate to a sense of we're not getting emotional during this, because I've seen the emotional response to this. And the emotional response is, oh, we need to bring in consultants and we need to have a press statement and we need to do a press conference, the whole deal. In this case here, we were talking earlier about always having data insights or data points associated with what we were doing. There are two key elements that we looked at this situation. One was, who's the individual threatening us? What do we know about them? And two, is this a reality? So is this fact or fiction? And who's the threatening individual? And we actually found that this individual was reaching out. They just had a bad customer experience and they were known by this business and they had been threatening a number of businesses. So we realized that about the individual. We had the customer have a good conversation, or the client of ours have a good conversation with their customer, and they were asking what exactly they were talking about, and there was no such object, at least based on the conversation that they had. So between the two of those, yes, there was no response directly to that individual. They ensured that that process that they provided was documented. They had a statement at the ready just in case there was press taking place. And most beneficially, what we saw from that client, they had a better dialogue with their customer for issues like this, if anything were to escalate. And both organizations then essentially looked at their mission statement and other information to make sure that they were being more inclusive at this moment. So it created these different moments. The key first moment was making sure they were prepared if press came calling, and that they knew what the actual reality was, not an individual who is providing their own distorted view on reality. So in summary, what we've seen and what continues to take place today goes to that first point, that we're always feeding insights in and not settling on that single source. If we were to totally take that last example at face value, we could get into greater trouble than the actual situation itself. That's how those cancellations take place, or a deeper crisis where there isn't one. Number two rule probably in crisis communications: don't create your own crises. And you avoid doing that by taking rash decisions. So that's why those responses have to be based on humility. What is natural to the business? Also, know and own those communications channels. If you always communicate over email, make sure you know the passwords, but also make sure that those avenues of communications are always available for you when you need to lean on those. And as noted, don't have that emotional standpoint at that moment, because emotions can only raise other people's emotions. People reflect the emotions that you're driving on social media. So remain measured at those moments to find your way through that level of crisis.
And to that last point, whether it's reaching out to a firm or an individual or just somebody you trust, when that example happened, we did get a call from that client we've worked with in the past. But even if it's an objective friend or a trusted confidant, it often, when somebody's attacking our business, you have a tendency to make it personal. So I would just ask somebody that you distinctly trust. It doesn't have to be a expert in crisis like us. It can be just a trusted friend or confidant, but somebody that you trust his or her opinion, because we do have a tendency to heighten our emotions, to Jeff's point. And I think when we act on emotions, especially in social, and pick up the phone and tweet or post something, things can get blown way out of proportion. And I will go back to that individual that Jeff is well aware of, that I had to unhire. I felt awful for that young lady, but she's going to live with that story the rest of her life, because she tweeted something in her young 20s that was way, way over the top and not something that I could ever see in our social post. And I told her 60 days from now, I'd be happy to sit down and counsel her as a father and as a human being, but as an employer, I just couldn't have it. But she can't relive that moment ever. And it's living on a website that more or less is they're trying to cancel that young lady because of a mistake she made that she can't relive. So don't be emotional, remain measured, and get some counsel from somebody that you trust, because these things can get ugly in a hurry. We've seen it in the last 16 or 18 months. And we may not like it, but it can affect our business in a very bad way. So,
Mike, what would you advise to do in a situation? Let's say you had hired that young woman and you found this tweet a year after she'd been working with you. Then what does the company do?
yeah, hindsight is 2020, and I don't know, but it's I don't even know what I'd advise her today, because where those tweets are living, they're going to be hard to ever go away. That's a really tough one for me, because as a human being, I felt for her, but as a business person, I know I made the right decision, and we got to think before we use social. We just got to think more logically. For God's sakes, don't pick up your phone after 3 beers in the middle of the night and send stupid stuff out.
Or what does an organization or a business owner do if you have a great employee and they do that? Someone that's been working with you 5-6 years, and they're out having a couple drinks and tweet something or post something or comment on something that's inappropriate, nothing to do with the business, but still very inappropriate. How do you handle a situation like that?
We do have strict social media policies in our HR manual about what people can and can't do. And I can't tell people what they can do in their personal lives, but our social media policy is very pointed, because we counsel people for a living on social, right? So, it's, we don't creep on people's social all day, every day, but that stuff comes back to me. And so I just think you got to be mature as a businessman or businesswoman, not to do things that are silly. And I'm trying not to speak out of school with what we do in our organization, but I think we got to be adults about social media, right? Because I don't want to have to call Jeff Lutz and say I need some help with an employee. Jeff's well aware of this situation, because he and I talked about it, because it was very personal to him. But so far I've been pretty lucky, but not so lucky with some customers that have called us.
Yeah.
So Mike, what do you do about negative reviews when you have a customer that just, that you did everything? I'm not the perfect company either, but you did everything right. You tried to give them the best service you can, and they still go on Google or wherever and post a 1-star review.
Yeah. Oh, Mike, that's such a tough game. I don't envy you because of what you do, because I know you got a great company and you do great work. I mean, I personally visited your place, but you're always in the business of dealing with consumers. You're always going to have that guy or that gal that, Jeff, have we done much on negative reviews as it relates to consumers and consumer rating places?
A little, and it boils down to something we call reputation management. And the idea of reputation management happens in a few fold. I mean, we had somebody come in about a year ago who had a Google problem. Essentially, they were only known for a negative incident that happened a number of years ago. And we worked with them on a few fronts, one to get positive press put in, and most importantly, authentic positive press, because we've seen bad examples of just paying for good reviews, that they're authentic in response, and also making sure that in some of those negative posts, Mike, in your case, where somebody may post a 1-star on Google, making sure that there are people monitoring those individuals and having the appropriate response at the ready. So these people know we're listening to them, and you can show that level of response and care, because that shows an equal amount of goodwill in response, even if they're just a troll.
Mike, there, and Jeff, it may be the same situation you're talking about. There's a really reputable businessman in town that called me a year or more ago, very well thought of, think the world of him. And he explained something, and he's probably well in his 60s, did something back in his college days, and he's trying to do a really big, is that same deal you're talking about, Jeff?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the ability to do stuff through SEO where you push positive press out to push the ugly stuff down. And this is something that this guy did when he was 20 years old and happened in college. And it was affecting a deal this guy was doing. Incredibly reputable guy. And we probably all have some skeleton in our closet, right? And he said, I need some help with it. We gave him an approach on how you could basically push that down in the search engine by doing some positive stuff. But with reviews, I think it becomes a little bit more challenging because, you know, if somebody wants to go out and give you a 1-star review, you're going to have that customer that's going to be there. But Michael, my guess is you got a bunch of 5-star reviews because of the business you are.
That's true. You know, you have one negative review and you have a bunch of 5-star reviews, and but people only look for the negative. So,
well, you're good at what you do because that 1-star is the one that keeps you up at night. Not all the 5 stars, but that's what makes you great.
Jeff, do you mind talking just a minute about the difference between the social monitoring and the social listening? You were telling us a little bit about that before the call, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, so one of the services that we provide, as you can all imagine, is true social media management. In other words, companies come to us and say, manage our Facebook. And when we do that, it's simply more than just putting out a fun Facebook post or liking things from time to time. There's a whole strategy that goes into it. And one of the big things that we look at, one of the case study examples we shared, we do social listening for. And what social listening means is rather than search a keyword into Facebook. So if, in Mike, in your case, if you're looking at countertops, rather than just search countertops into Facebook and get all the things that relate to countertops, we can actually look across social media and identify both the individuals and the topics that influence the amount of conversations that happen across social channels. So maybe there's refrigerators create a push around countertops, or new ovens. We can actually see those trends, and when people most engage with their favorite refrigerator companies, and when those individuals send out a post on social media, who that can essentially light up to create those actions. So social listening takes us to a greater level. It's more than just getting the keyword information and searching a topic. It allows us to look at the whole social media landscape, identify the individuals and the topics that are really moving people. One of the interesting trends that you all might enjoy is if you ever look up tequila on social listening, tequila spikes on Tuesday at certain times of the day because of Taco Tuesday. Then it goes down Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then spikes again Saturday. And it does that every week. The same thing, Tuesday up, Saturday up, week after week. And then you can see when LeBron James tweets about Taco Tuesday, it spikes even higher. So then you can see through something like social listening that Taco Tuesday is relating to tequila across America in the evenings on Tuesdays. You can see these weird ties. And because LeBron tweets, a celebrity is also tweeting their own version, but they're tweeting about tequila. So you can see all these trends and how they play together. It's a fascinating world that's well beyond just the face value of what's happening on your own personal Facebook page.
The question, are there platforms that are more at risk for these kind of cancel cultures?
I'm assuming when we're talking platforms, we're talking social platforms in this case. More at risk. Cancellations happen. When we look at a cancellation, any sort of cancellation that we've ever studied or spoken with the individual about, there's what we call the native channel of the post, or the native channel the channel that individual is most known on. So in other words, if you're a big individual on Instagram and have 100,000 followers on Instagram, but you only have 1,000 on Twitter, you're not even on Twitter, the conversation won't necessarily be taking place on Twitter. A true cancellation, those injectors that I described, where it's not first offense, it's second and third offense, where those really take place are on alternate channels from that main channel, because people believe, because they're not here on Twitter, we can make fun of them and we can draw some unique insights about them. So they're always happening on another channel. So it's a broad statement to say it's on the secondary channel. In other words, when looking at a cancellation, it's not on the channel you're on, it's on the channels you're not on.
Let's see. I think that's all the questions I had. Did anyone else out there have any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much for joining us. Let me ask one last question. Do you find more of these crises, are they developed internally from a post that, or something that an employee did, or the company did, or some content that they put out? Or do you find that it's typically the organization is more collateral damage, kind of the Inside the Five example, where someone else put something out there?
Boy, Jeff, you can ponder, and the calls that he and I've gotten in the last 15 months have been all over the board.
Mhm.
I mean, that, the call that, with the example, he came outside the organization, but the customer called, they were very thoughtful. I mean, it can be an employee. I think we showed you a list, you'd shake your head. And they're usually at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, when Jeff is ready to go play golf, and I'll text him and say, "Oh God, you're not going to believe this." They just always happen at the strangest times. And a crisis is they need help now. But they're all very unique and interesting, and people just need help. They need objectivity. They need guidance. I mean, these 4 points that Jeff laid in the summary are all well done, but you think they're just all unique and interesting, and there's really not one size fits all. I'm amazed at some of the calls we've gotten, but crises seem to have been elevated through COVID.
Yeah. Well, Mike, as you know, I managed one crisis, which was 4.5 months long.
Yeah.
And spiked all the time. We didn't find that they were often social media driven. Like, the first offense wasn't per se social media. As Mike mentioned, the benefit of a third-party analysis. So we would come in and say, you know what, you really have your website could be an issue, or our team looking at, you're not prepared if 3 customers were to come at you, or you haven't been transparent about whatever the issue is. That lack of preparation. So it was more statement creation, email creation, asset creation, and asset advisement that we were seeing the most of. Because a social media challenge, in most of our cases, I mean, they don't get to levels of cancellation unless they have some of those hot points that we described. We see issues all the time that are related to social media challenges, bad posts, weird comment. It's all how we manage those. We dealt with one client, they had a large holiday campaign. And the holiday campaign included basically individuals, consumers, providing personal images, positive images. They were shirts related to the holidays. And where the issues came in, or potential issues, where people were posting vulgar shirts, which I don't know why people own shirts that have any level of tremendous vulgarity, but we saw those and they were taking place on Facebook. And the key there was, how do you respond to those? Because if you make a bad stink about them and you're saying, hey, we need to get that off, and you're making a very highlighted post and it's all those conversations are taking place over Facebook, yeah, that will create an issue. But in most cases, those can easily be dealt with. We pulled that, we hid that post, spoke to them in a offline, said we're hiding this, but we'll still enter you for the contest that we had. That was the goal at the end of the day. So recognizing what the actual intent was and being able to manage through that. Because the response is usually the bigger issue toward the crises versus the initial situation.
I think that's all we had, and we did great on time. We're right up at our hour. So I appreciate you so much, Mike and Jeff, for making time for us today. Thank you everyone for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, this is recorded and we will put it up on our YouTube page. If there's some great slides in here. Feel free to share it within your organizations, share it with anyone you know that could benefit from this. So thanks. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
We're always here, but I pray you don't call. See you guys. Have a great day. Great weekend.
Thank you.